word entrepreneur, like people say entrepreneur as if it's a specific vertical or a specific skill set or a specific job. When, I mean, you and I are entrepreneurs, we do two things that are completely different, like have nothing to do. And I think unfortunately the VC or Silicon Valley has like perverted the word entrepreneur into being one thing. And that is, you go start a company that has to be like the most scalable company in the world. You raise millions of dollars, but it's also created this image that has disappeared. Like people like my dad, or people that run an HVAC company, or people that rent dumpsters to people in their local towns that are millionaires that have built up these small companies that aren't scalable at all. They're awful companies based off of like what Silicon Valley would consider. I think there's so many different ways to be an entrepreneur that for me, when I was starting in like 2010 to 2012, I wish that I had opened my horizons more and thought more, because I think there were a lot more opportunities than just the typical Silicon Valley path that I sort of tried to follow. I was just trying to like launch myself into go raise money, go build a big company. It frankly was the wrong decision for me.
Hey friends, welcome to Right Off Track, your favorite entrepreneurial resource where we dive into the mindset, strategy, and purpose of entrepreneurs around the world who are sharing their real stories and insights with you. I believe that we all have a unique purpose in life, and that embracing our unique and special journey will help uncover that. If this helps you on your journey, I so welcome your support as we grow and improve this channel. Join us, subscribe. I promise you, I'm fully dedicated to making this work better every step of the way. So share your feedback, subscribe, share with a friend, and let's go on this adventure together right off track. Enjoy this episode.
Going off track is taking a chance on yourself.
Following your pulse of curiosity.
It's making your own decisions.
The most wonderful adventure.
Hey friends, Anya Smith here. Get ready to dive into the dynamic world of HR tech. Today we're chatting with Andrew Swiler, the brains behind the acquisition of Lanteria, a standout in software solutions. Andrew's journey is all about breaking the mold, tackling the tech scene without a techie background, and making bold moves in SaaS business. From Silicon Valley to the challenges of global markets, his story is packed with lessons for any go-getter. So grab a seat as we explore Andrew's unique path and savvy strategies that are reshaping the HR tech landscape. Andrew, so excited to have you here.
Thank you, Anya. I'm super excited to talk to you, and I appreciate all the time to let me come on.
Oh, my pleasure. Here we are starting the new year, and this is a very fitting conversation about starting your entrepreneurial path, pivoting a lot, finding kind of your legging in that space. And can you share for our listeners, we talked about you acquiring this HR company, but you have a long-standing background in entrepreneurship beforehand. How did you find that initial pull towards the entrepreneurial direction?
Well, there were two sort of pulls. I would say the first one was I live in Barcelona. My wife and I moved from San Francisco. She's from Barcelona. We moved to Barcelona. I didn't speak the language. I couldn't get a job here. I basically moved here in, I think it was 2013, and had no other option but to start a company. And coincidentally, my wife at the same time was going to start a company. And I was as well. I started an e-commerce company when I first moved here. I don't know if you remember fab.com. It was like a huge success in the US, and then it blew up. We tried to start a similar thing here in Spain, and ours blew up due to just complete failure and ineptitude on our end. We spent like 5 months trying to build it. My partner ended up trying to build something completely different than what we originally envisioned and didn't really tell us. And the whole thing fell apart. But even before that, like I come from, my dad was an entrepreneur. My grandfather was an entrepreneur. My great grandfather. I think actually my family that I don't remember, was a great grandfather moved from Lithuania and started an outpost in Wisconsin, in a little town in Wisconsin for lumberjacks, selling them stuff. I don't know what you sold lumberjacks in 1860 in Wisconsin. But that same place turned into this store that my family ran up until my grandfather retired in 1994. So I come from a long line of entrepreneurs. I'm the only entrepreneur of my brothers and sister, but I think we kind of have that inside. And I saw like my dad my whole life, start companies, start stores, start things. And he was a pretty moderately successful entrepreneur. So I always kind of had it inside of me, I would say.
That's so beautiful. Can you think of anything, and it might be hard to discern because you're in it, that you got told as you were growing up that inspired and supported the entrepreneurship within you?
I wouldn't say something that was told to me, but like most of what I remember of being with my dad was he's still alive, so we don't have to talk to him in the past tense, but he's still but
Hi, Dad.
yeah, we spent a lot of time in his store. So like he used to actually start Christmas stores, like seasonal Christmas stores, and I would spend like my weekends over, or basically my whole Christmas break was I would go with my dad every day to his store, and I would work from like 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. with him at the store. I would gift wrap. I would ring people up, but that was from when I was like 7 years old. And I just remember like fondly like spending time with him. Like we would go get a coffee together and sit there, and that was like a lot
At
of
7?
our bonding time. Yes. Well, he would get a coffee. I would just be with him. I would get a hot chocolate. But that was a lot of like our bonding time because you're in a store, so it wasn't always busy. So you spent a lot of time together, and so I would just watch that. Like he didn't show me like the ins and outs of accounting or anything like that, but you just saw like your dad kind of sets his own thing up. You saw him start from zero, like go into these stores where it was just an empty space, and he would build the whole thing with these people that he would hire. And so I just saw it from an early age, and he never really like encouraged us or told us this was the way, but like you kind of see that. And I really believe, knowing other people that I know that came from parents that had normal jobs, so to speak, that it is a different perspective, and it is a different lifestyle. Like if you don't live that when you're a kid, you don't know that sort of world exists, that you can just build something from nothing if your dad worked at an accounting firm.
Right. Absolutely. That's what I think about for my kids as well, that although it's a process and it's challenging and I'm just starting, I really believe it will set an example for my kids, that they have other options, regardless of where it goes, that it's not just a journey that we take for ourselves. It's also an example for other people, our friends, our family, that something else is possible. And here I'm going, and I'm still alive.
Yeah. And it's a lesson in sales. Like I always saw, I think being an entrepreneur, you're always selling something, whatever it is, investment, the business, the thing that you're selling. So you see how to sell. And like, I try, and like my kids are 6 and 7. I try and give them some ideas. Like I've never forced them. I'm not like, all right, let's go out and, sell this at your school. But I like drop things on them. I'm like, we live in Barcelona and they speak English. And I always tell them, tell your buddies from parents that you'll charge them $5 a week and you'll only speak English to their kids, and see if they pay you for it. Because some of these parents spend like $50 euros a week on school on classes for their kids to learn English. And I said, like, see if you can find an alternative. And my kids think it's just funny. But I think just like planting those seeds of like, hey, you could sell this, or you have a skill that you could sell yourself. I think they learned something. I think it absorbs somewhere inside of them.
I love that. It reminds me of when I was growing up in Russia, in middle school. I remember there was this company, Avon, like they do little makeup and things like that. And you have so my dad, because I wanted to, my dad signed up because this is Russia. They don't care. My dad signed up for me, and I would do this in middle school. I would bring the little magazines and I would sell like little makeup. And I thought it was so cool, right? It's something very accessible, and it teaches you something. You have to think a little bit about that. But I had no, it wasn't like some deep strategy to take over the world financially at that point, but it gets you dirty and you're just curious. So like wherever your child's curious at that point, embrace that, support that. And I do look at it back. It's like, it instills some kind of curiosity about like just like trying something for yourself, starting something wherever you are, and just like, there's no danger in it, So find your child wherever they're at in their curiosity and just encourage that.
Yeah. And they might not become entrepreneurs. They might be, I have a good friend from college that he was always hustling. He was always out there with like some sort of thing, and he still has like some side projects, but he got like a great job at a marketing consulting firm, and he makes a good salary, and he just kind of gave up the entrepreneurial world, but it's still part of who he is, and it makes him good at what he is in his job. But I think everyone, it's worth trying and kind of being in that world.
I love that you say that. Let's tackle that. So that's something I think is so important. People think like, oh, there's such a risk about becoming an entrepreneur. And I agree, there are risks, but I think you open yourself up to a different way of thinking about your limits, about failure, about learning and what it takes, and about even selling, right? You realize that selling is really about connections, right? It's not just about like, it's a negative thing about like money and da. It's really about how do you instill trust? How do you come across, and how do you build connection and, relay message in an effective way. Like those are soft skills that like are effective and powerful no matter what you decide to do. So as an entrepreneur, you prioritize things a little different. You look at the world and possibilities a little bit different. And so if you take that and you learn those skills and you decide to go back or go into corporate, like just imagine the possibilities. So to me, like entrepreneurship, when you unlock it inside you, it's not, a matter if you do this for the rest of your life or not. It's just a gift that you have and a mindset that you have that can be powerful anywhere you go.
And I think, the word entrepreneur, like people say entrepreneur as if it's a specific vertical or a specific skill set or a specific job. When, you and I are entrepreneurs, we do two things that are completely different, like have nothing to do with each other. And I think, unfortunately, the VC or Silicon Valley has like perverted the word entrepreneur into being one thing. And that is, you go start a company that has to be like the most scalable company in the world, and you're going to raise millions of dollars. And for them, that serves because you see like VCs, they need deal flow. So for them to build up that image of like Facebook and we need the next Facebook or Google, and you could be that person, that's a huge benefit for them. Right. But it's also created this image that has disappeared. Like people like my dad or people that run an HVAC company. Or people that rent dumpsters to people in their local towns that are millionaires that have built up these small companies that aren't scalable at all. They're awful companies based off of like what Silicon Valley would consider, but have made great money for their family, like generational money. And now they're even selling these businesses to private equity companies and other things. And I think there's so many different ways to be entrepreneur that, for me, when I was starting in like 2010 to 2012, I wish that I had opened my horizons more and thought more, because I think there were a lot more opportunities than just the typical Silicon Valley path that I sort of tried to follow. Yeah. And it was frankly detrimental to me. And it would have been an easier path to say, hey, maybe starting a service business, an accounting firm, a finance firm, something like that would be a better starting point. And then from there, scaling up and learning those skills where I was just trying to like launch myself into go raise money, go build a big company. And it frankly was the wrong decision for me.
And can you share some of the learnings, some of the wrong learnings? So you mentioned, starting this online business. I think there were a couple more businesses that preceded the business that you're at. So what were some of the key learnings along the way?
So the online business, the key thing was just know who you're starting a business with and have like a realistic starting point, middle point, and end point, especially where we were. Like we were living in Barcelona. There was really no funding availability to us. And we were trying to build like this huge scalable company. It was just really stupid. Like it was a terrible idea. And I wish somebody had like woken me up at the time. But from there, my wife and I started this company, an eyewear company together. She had actually already started while I was building that horrible e-commerce company. And when that collapsed, she needed help finding money. She needed money to like build the molds and to get the product started. So she brought me in for that part and like the finance part. And I ended up helping her raise money. But then I was sort of beholden to the investors because I had helped raise it and they were expecting that I was going to be involved. And we built up the company. We did a decent job building it. We didn't raise a lot of money, and we ended up getting it to do about $500,000 in sales without bringing in any other capital. We did like franchises, we franchised to different countries, but like essentially we just made a product and then we opened a store in Barcelona and tourists would come into our store and buy our glasses. And then sometimes those tourists would say, wow, I've never seen anything like this. Because it was like they were flexible. You could change the lenses. It was pretty unique. And they would come and they would say, can I bring this to Dubai? Can I open this store we opened a store in Abu Dhabi. We opened a store in Rome. We opened a store in Mexico. And it was all just people that like walked into our store. But we, at the time, like Facebook ads were blowing up. And what I didn't see at the time was there was this tailwind where we were trying to push this one single product that was pretty complicated to sell. And it really was only interesting in person. And there was all these other eyewear companies blowing up around us, just spending money on Facebook ads. And what would have probably been smarter on my end was to say, hey, there's an opportunity here. And all of a sudden I knew a lot about eyewear, how to produce it, how to build it. I could have gone to an eyewear manufacturer and said, hey, let's put this idea on hold that really isn't going that well, and let's go all in on Facebook ads and bringing a product that people are already looking for, but they can't find it online, and build this presence. And I didn't have the capacity to, I guess what you would call is pivot, but to say to like our partners and our investors, like, guys, this idea really wasn't that good of an idea. It's going okay, but it's not going great. And there's a lot of friction in the sale. Why don't we put, the money we made and invest into a new type of product and go towards, what's working, which is scaling these Facebook ads, which in retrospect, you can always think is easy to see, but I didn't realize we were just in the Wild West at the time. You don't realize you're in it until later you realize, wait a second, that was a gold rush and we totally missed it because we didn't have a product that was easy to sell through Facebook. And we just frankly didn't know how to exploit it. And around us, there were people just exploiting the algorithm on Facebook like crazy. And they became millionaires within a year, basically, selling the same, similar type of product to us.
Wow.
So
and
that was a couple of the lessons there.
And I love how authentically you share that. And yet I don't sense, I sense a sense of learning and, that, yes, I've become wiser, but I don't sense any resentment around it. Maybe you're just a professional actor. And before we go into your latest acquisition, I'm curious, how did you approach jumping this? So many people just don't even start because of the fear element, right? They like, this is too risky. I have the safe thing. How did you overcome that first barrier of fear to start even the online business, or even to move to Barcelona, knowing that it wouldn't be a place where you could do your traditional job?
So I worked in private equity. I to be quite honest, I think I made more money when I was 24 than I made when I was 35 or even almost 40. I didn't care. Like I really, if I had, my wife really supported me. She also comes from a culture where it's like failing isn't good, but she also came from just like a family that was pretty supportive of, artists and doing things differently. And her father was an entrepreneur as well. I didn't care if I ended up living at my mother-in-law's house, or I didn't care if I had to go back. I lived at my parents' house in 2000 when I was 28. I moved back to my parents' house for 2 months, just like because I was in transit. Like I was going from one place to another. I lived with my parents. I didn't care what people thought. Like I really didn't care. Like, and I didn't have a wife that was like, well, if we don't have this, we're not gonna be able to pay this. And we just lived very modestly always. And it was like, we just lived to our means. Even now we live way below what we could probably afford to do, just because you feel more comfortable, like paying less, living more modestly, not overextending yourself. That, what's it called? Lifestyle creep that a lot of people get. And like trying to keep up with other people. Like, I guess I'm fortunate. I live in a nice suburb, I would call it, of Barcelona, and people are well off, but nobody's here like comparing each other. You don't go to school and be like, oh, what shoes is that person wearing? It's like, nobody cares. And when I go home and I see some of my friends that live in some of these places, and they're like, that's totally true. These like alpha moms that like look at each, like what's with her? Ooh. What does she do? Yeah. And I'm like, oh, that sounds terrible. So I just kind of took myself out of the mainstream and threw myself into this place. So I could see why, if you lived like where I grew up, it would be hard to make that adjustment from a mortgage, insurance, kids, where I just didn't care because it was like, well, I don't have insurance right now. So hopefully nothing bad happens.
There's public health care.
Yeah, there's public health care that does help. You lose certain things around like funding or the market, but public health care definitely. I never have worried about health care, so that's a positive thing.
I love that. What I heard from that is, yes, this innate sense of like looking at money a certain way, but also the support of community, right? If you have people around you who align to that priority system, meaning they're not super obsessed about money, but they're supportive and they encourage creativity and exploration, that gives a sense of connection. And for anybody listening, if you don't feel like you have that right now, I don't want you to feel disheartened. I know from my journey, I didn't necessarily have an entrepreneurial community around me. Again, my family was mostly in Russia and I grew up here as a foreign kid, but I found a lot of that community on LinkedIn. I found that sometimes like when you just start reaching out, people like, that's how we met, right? Just
Yeah.
social media, right? Exactly how we met. It's like you start forming a community when you start setting your intention and exploring the intention and goal, people will come up. So if you're listening to this and you're like, oh, well, I'm not destined for this because I don't have that wife, that partner, that immediate
Yeah.
community, that dad, that's just, that's a feel good kind of excuse. But really, we can create those communities if we start sharing our attention out with the world.
For sure. Twitter changed for me during the pandemic. I spent way too much time on Twitter, but it ended up being a community. I ended up doing what I do now because I met a lot of people that were doing this. I knew people that were doing something called search funds. I knew people here in Spain and I knew people in the US, but all of a sudden I realized there was all these people doing really interesting alternative routes to entrepreneurship. And that totally changed things for me, of seeing that on Twitter and interacting with those people and having the chance to talk to them. And they did push me more because you're like, wow, that's possible. Like people were buying $10 million companies, or people were starting these agencies, or, there was a lot of possibilities that you see that if you don't see it in person, you don't even know it exists. Like you don't know that that's a possibility.
Can you share a little more what you mean by like, what is this thing that we don't know exists? Like what opened up for you?
So, I mean, for me, I knew, I guess, so we acquired Lanteria. And, people think like you acquire a company, that sounds like a very daunting task, but really there's this whole world of what are called search funds that have been around for decades in, mostly in Stanford, Harvard, and sort of restricted circles. And what they do is, they look for a small business. It's like a private equity fund, except for one person and one acquisition. They look for a business, they raise capital to go out and search for this business. And then when they find the business, they go back to their capital partners, and the capital partners put money in, and they, some of it's debt, some of it's equity, and they'll acquire business. Typically a search fund is looking for businesses that are doing I would say 1 to 5 million in EBITDA, maybe 10 to 20 million in revenue. Yeah. And then, obviously software is a little bit different than the type of businesses search funds look for are more traditional Main Street businesses. Right. What I knew is because I was overseas, I needed a sort of remote situation. But what I did was I spent hours and hours kind of learning through these things called SIMs. They're confidential information memorandums, which are basically just for sale signs of companies, and like the pamphlet that they give you at like an open house. So they give you all the details about the company. You learn about these markets. And I read things from, like I said, like dumpster companies, toilet rental companies, HVAC companies. I read all these just to like learn the market and what was out there. But I knew I needed to sort of work on something remotely. And through all that reading, I just got to know the market and got to know what was out there. So when after reading thousands of these, when a deal like Lanteria came to us, I saw how it was so far outside the other things I was seeing, and it allowed me to move quickly inside of there. But part of that was seeing, like I said, spending a lot of time on Twitter, talking to people, asking questions, putting things out there. Like, I would tweet a lot about like things I was seeing, SIMs I was reading. Is this normal? Is this not normal? And people would respond. And it was a little ephemeral. I think there was a moment in time in 2020 where a lot of people were online, and it was kind of new for a lot of people to share this much information. Because I think Twitter before that, like, was, people were using it for different reasons. And I think people became very open at that time. And now it's kind of turned into whatever it's kind of turned into over the last year. But it gave you a lot of information and a lot of access to people that you would have had to work inside of a private equity firm to get this information, or inside of a startup for information people were just giving away for free to whoever asked.
Wow, it's beautiful. And I have the sense that people are still wanting to help. Like, I think if you approach people in the right way and you have curiosity and kind of like, people still at their core want to help and give advice, right? They feel good about themselves giving advice to others. So my hope is that, although here we are starting 2024 and people have normalized to the post-pandemic environment, that still people will want to help if you ask and find the right people.
And I think the key is asking the right questions. I get a lot of people, like, I'll go on a podcast and I'll get 50 LinkedIn messages right afterwards, like, hey, I'd love to ask you some questions. And it's like, if I talk to all these people, I would never do anything else. And I think a lot of people don't realize that because they've never been on the other side. It's the same. I tell people that are like applying for jobs, I always say, you have to experience what it's like being on the other side of the table, of being the employer, getting all these applications, I said, then you would realize how to stand out, because you're just thinking like, I'm going to send this over. Maybe they'll respond.
Yeah.
You got to think like, I need to show something specific, actionable, with a real question that this person can answer.
Yeah.
And then they can get back to you. And I've learned that for the people that I go up the ladder to, I'll send messages to people that have huge funds, and I'll ask just like a very specific question about a very specific thing, and they'll respond, and then I'll leave them alone. And then I might have another one in 2 months, and they respond, and then I leave them alone. And eventually that builds a relationship, because they're like, who is this guy? And then you become interested, and you want to see like what's going on and see their journey. So I think people also have to be conscious of how they ask things.
That's a great piece of advice. I love that. Yes, like no expectations, but ask very specifically. So show your knowledge and that you understand the person's expertise as well, as opposed to just like, hey, that's everybody. Like, hey,
can you help me with my life?
How was your day? I only have 10 more million things to do. So
that's the worst. People send me messages on LinkedIn all the time, and it's like, how are you? And I'm like, why did you write how are you? Like, why did you write this? That's the only thing I see is how are you? It's like, nope, I don't know what the rest is about.
Yes. And no offense, if you're doing this right now, like don't take offense to this, like just learn. Like we all have a start somewhere, and I'm sure I've written horrible messages at some point or even now, like, but I'm trying to learn and get better. And as long as you're there, then you are making progress. Okay. So we talked about you acquiring this new company. So what drew you to the HR space? Like, why is this exciting? You've learned a lot from your peers' experience. You talked about having the self-reflection, find like, this is a viable thing, this is lucrative, and you did a lot of research. What drew you now to this HR tech space?
So the first thing that drew me to like acquiring a company was, for me, this is like it's like being an entrepreneur on second base rather than being at home plate, starting with an O&O account. So it gives you the chance to like, you've already leaped over a bunch of issues. And I mean, what you said before, I don't have any I don't have any hard feelings about things that I went through before, but I do have scars of things that I didn't want to go through again.
Yes.
And so for me, this was a way to sort of avoid those same pitfalls of the sort of 0 to 1 process, and now going from like 1 to 10 instead of 0 to 1. So that was sort of what drew me into this space, was just my own personal like battle scars of like, okay, I need to do this in a different way. The HR tech space. So this company kind of fell to us because of, I was just out there always looking for different things. And these guys had reached out to me saying, we're trying to sell. Their expectations from a valuation perspective were not realistic at the beginning. And I just kind of hung around. I would send them a message once in a while and say like, how are things going? What's going on? And eventually they got to a point where they just couldn't sell. They couldn't find a good buyer for them. And it was a company that, I mean, the other thing that people that get into at least my space are they look for the perfect company. The search fund people look for the perfect company in the perfect situation. And I frankly think that those don't exist. There's always going to be hairy deals. There's always going to be problems. And you got to be willing to eat those problems and deal with them, because that's how you're going to get the best deal possible. Like if you're you have to know like what you're good at too. If you're really good at like, I just have a bunch of money in my pocket and I can go find whatever I want, and then from there, we're just going to put more money in and it's going to grow. Okay. That wasn't where I was coming from. I was coming from the place of, I needed to use my own skills, my own knowledge to take something that wasn't working or sort of was working and make it better. And so I think a lot of times people get confused of like what game they're playing inside of entrepreneurship or inside of acquisition. You need to know, what is your strengths? What is the game that you're playing? And try and put yourself in a position to play the best game. And frankly, right now I'm not playing in my best position. Like I'm trying to raise funds because I need to put people that are better than me, because we're at the level where now we need to start putting better people into the seats they're in. And we need capital in order to be able to do that. So that is a big challenge, and it ends up eating up a lot of my time, where instead of, being out there doing sales or talking to our team or operations, I get stuck with this. And then HR, it was just something that when the deal came to us, I got really excited about HR. I think HR for me is, people talk about AI, they talk about robots. I think humans are still going to be the main driver of any enterprise value for companies over the next, at least for our lifetime. I don't know what will happen in our kids' lifetime or what the changes will be. But I personally think humans are the hardest thing to manage, the hardest thing to find, the hardest resource for everyone. And so you need to have tools that make it easy, as easy as possible to manage people. And that gets me excited. And as like an entrepreneur, I think my one piece of advice to other entrepreneurs is always find something in the mundane or the day-to-day to get yourself excited. Because if you think you're just going to get excited about the big sales and the fundraise and all the things like that, the day-to-day is such a grind. And there's so many ups and downs and walls you run into that for me, like I get interested just by looking at how our software works, looking at like how one of our clients, gives us some feedback, or I do a podcast with HR professionals, and just hearing people talk about like what they do in HR, which I know nothing about. I've never even worked in a large company before.
Yeah.
And having a woman that runs HR for like a 5,000 person company explain to me what she does, I think is interesting. And so you gotta find the interest and like curiosity inside the mundane. Otherwise, being an entrepreneur also could be terrible because you're going to hit a wall at some point.
Absolutely. I heard this from Dr. Benjamin Hardy recently. He talks about instead of analyzing yourself from like where you are to where you want to be and always comparing yourself against your future self, compare yourself towards your past self. Meaning like we look back and reflect on how have I grown? What have I learned? And that gives you a much healthier psychological way to assess yourself and to build resilience, because you can always say, oh, I've learned something. I grew from this versus having this constant delta of where you're lacking is a much bigger strain on your psyche.
I agree. I think even social media could be good for people if they use it for that as a tool. That's how I started actually posting on Twitter, is I needed to tell myself things that I had done well, because you don't see the things you've done. You don't see your journey a lot of times. You just see like, oh, I did some things. And then you write it down and you share it with people. And, you have to share it without caring if anyone pays attention to it, like anything in social media. But for me, it was just an exercise of like, I did something and I'm going to tell people about it. And instead of kind of like hiding behind yourself. And that was a huge change for me, to compare myself, because then when you put it down on paper, you're like, oh, I did do some stuff and I did learn things, and then you can apply those learnings.
Yeah, I love it. And because you're sharing out to the world, again, there's this sense like you're learning, other people are seeing those learnings around you, and you create this ripple effect of people supporting you. You get this inspiration. So I definitely agree with that we have to share our learnings, share our challenge, share our questions of the world, because we get a sense of self-reflection in that way. And also we attract, more resources, more support, more acknowledgement, where appropriate along our journey. And I'm curious, we talk about Search Fund. What stage of entrepreneurship do you think that venue, that path is right for an entrepreneur? Is there a certain kind of maturity, experience level, capital level that people should consider this path? Or should it be something that you would recommend people to search at all levels of entrepreneurship?
I think so. I mean, search funds are weird because they're pretty much exclusively MBA people, usually men, and usually MBAs, usually former investment bankers. I do meet now more women that are in search funds. It's a very weird world, like the specific search fund world. But I think, so what I did, the search fund world, so you basically get money to go search for the business. What a lot of people do like me is they don't care about that part. Like they're like, I want to buy a business. I want to, start, I want to get into entrepreneurship this way. Yeah. I think if you have a specific skill set or a knowledge of a certain market, and you find a good business that you can buy, there's always money to have. So, I mean, even if you're 25 years old and something, for example, I saw a business that was Lego minifigures that sold on Amazon. That was a business I looked at. It was a fantastic business. It was actually one of the few businesses I got pretty close to buying. If you know how the Lego market works and you're 25 years old and you find this business that's doing, I forget what they're doing, 7 million in sales or something like that, you could probably find some investors if you are just scrappy enough to go find family offices, look for angel investors, go out there and scrape the internet and find people's emails, or use even tools like Apollo to find people. You can be scrappy enough to say like, I know this market. Here's why. Put together a plan. I'm not a big fan of business plans. I think they're usually a waste of time, but I think I'm a big fan of like investor memos, of like sitting down, writing down like, what do I know? Why is this market interesting? What am I going to do differently? And why is this a good investment? I think that the world is out there, and I think there's I don't know if you've ever read the 4 Hour Work Week
Oh yes,
from Tim
I have.
Ferriss.
Tim Harris's
Yeah.
like book, the Advice of Titans. I'm paraphrasing it like on my
So
desk. Yeah.
I mean, a lot of people I've talked to always say like it's a very deceiving title. I think what the most interesting lesson I learned from that book when I was 25 when I read it is you can really do anything if you just try. Like you can't become like a brain surgeon at 30, but if you want to email like Bill Clinton and see if he responds to you, just go try it. Like today, I emailed my daughter wanted tickets to this concert, and it's like a super famous band, and we're gonna go to the concert. And I just sent an email to their band manager saying, "Hey, can we come backstage and meet them when they're here?" And he hasn't answered me yet. I don't know if he'll answer me, but who cares?
Yeah.
Like you send a nice email, you give them an
I
out,
love it.
and that's it. And that book taught me that it's like there's no blocker if you think you can do it and you have some sort of specific knowledge and you kind of put yourself there. If you start from zero and you just say like, well, I'm going to go buy a $50 million business, it might be a little bit difficult, but there's always an avenue. There's always some thing there. It might just be you're gritty and you know how to send cold emails. Like if you're good at that, you could probably raise some money and go buy a business.
It's so interesting. I talked to a lot of entrepreneurs on the podcast, and what I realized, especially from entrepreneurs who have like this Stanford background and like these spaces where you initially think like, oh, that's where entrepreneurs come from. And what I hear them talking about is what was really important is to humanize the experience of being an entrepreneur. So I mean, like a lot of times in those environments, you have CEOs, founders come to speak to them and share their mishaps and their learnings and just really share the human aspect of like, we didn't have it figured out. It was close to failing. Like it was kind of like a miracle that this worked. And people say like, oh, you know what? Like there's a really human story there. Like this wasn't just like somebody who was like, oh, I had it all figured out. There's not like this facade that we often like, we see the facade, and not to say it's intentional, but once you distance yourself from this like image of an entrepreneur and success, you're like, oh, there's something different between me as a human and that person as a human. Yeah. And the more you realize that there's actually not that much different, that really it's just another human being who like struggled and failed and learned and went for like, the more you're like, oh, like, why can't I do that? And I'm not saying the same result is going to follow, but you can do a lot more than you think is possible if you don't set these limits around like how different and how you're lacking than somebody else.
Yeah. I mean, there is a lot of survivorship bias in entrepreneurship where to get yourself out of bed and to get yourself to actually do it, you look at these like great stories of success, but it's just littered with horrible failures along the way of like that little thing that made it so this one was successful, made it so this one failed. But you got it. I mean, that there's always a possibility. I mean, there's a 90% chance that you're going to fail. And if you get into it knowing that probability and knowing sort of what the odds are against you, at least you go in with your eyes open and not expecting. And I tell a lot of people that are like, especially in search funds, people will send me like decks of things, and they're always looking at these like crazy exits and like these growth opportunities or even startup companies. And I always say to them, like, what if things don't go right? Like, what's your plan if things don't go right? What's your plan if you got to pay this debt and you don't have any cash? What's your plan if, that sales guy that you were hiring doesn't work out? And to try and think of that flip side and, what are you going to do? And in that case, and a lot of times you don't know what you're going to do, but you just kind of got to understand that you have to have that sort of survivorship inside of you to keep pushing like that. It's all, most entrepreneurs that I know that have been successful, just, they don't give up and they just keep pushing and eventually it's going to work. And sometimes there's stories that are pretty sad of people I know that, spent years or decades working on something that didn't work. And there's other stories where it took them a decade. And then in year 12, all of a sudden it just blew up. And so it's a game of survival a lot of times, but it's fun.
Yeah. Who do you think should embrace like the entrepreneur journey? Is there, a right person, or is there kind of, your own story of why, excuse me, why it's been worth it for you while you decided after, learnings, after failures, after things didn't go quite right, like you kept at it?
I would say people that, one thing that makes me kind of sad, like I do know some younger people that I've met people I know that they complain a lot about the current situation in the world, about like difficult things. And I think if your natural tendency is to complain, like first before becoming an entrepreneur, you need to like solve that problem of thinking about like most of the things are in your hands. You know, you can't have a private jet. That's not in your hands, but you could slowly improve and kind of move yourself up the ladder as long as you kind of build like realistic expectations, realistic goals, and not try and say like, it's not fair. This guy's a private jet and he owns an island and that's bullshit. And I should, you know, I can't buy a sandwich. Like, okay, figure out how to buy the sandwich and then, you know, figure out how to solve your own problems. So for me, one of the key things is like anyone that wants to be an entrepreneur, if you're like natural tendency to sort of complain about things, it's not going to work. Like it's never going to work because there's no one to complain to when you're an entrepreneur. Like nobody cares. You're on your own and you're going to be complaining to yourself. So I'd say that's like the one type of personality that I would say avoid entrepreneurship in general. I'd say just the type of people that I know that are entrepreneurs are people that like they're either so fixated on like one thing that like really interests them. And those are, you know, like the Silicon Valley types, like they just have like this obsession with something. Or the other people I know is, like I said, they're very generalists. They are interested in a lot of things and they find interests and ways to like persevere in any sort of like mundane circumstance. So I think if you're a curious person and you want to apply that curiosity to something different, I think entrepreneurship is an awesome journey for that because you do get to experience a lot of different markets, a lot of different types of people, a lot of different hats that you get to wear, where if you're in a business or in a company, you don't get to do those things. You're very pigeonholed into one thing. So that's one of the things that I always tell people.
I love that. And you talk about, you know, people who have this, you know, maybe fanaticism and passion. And then this other side where maybe the passion isn't the leading thing. And I think this is what we talked about when we first synced is that what caught me as unique about your story is that you're not necessarily driven by like this passion project. Like that wasn't like your path, that you had this passion and a sense of purpose and you're going to change the world. And that's like the business that you created, which is the common story that we hear. What are your thoughts about like passion and work and how they align and the importance of like having this quote unquote purpose as you go into this entrepreneurial journey?
So I mentioned to you before, I had a purpose-driven company. So after the eyewear, while we had the eyewear company, we actually started a recycled clothing company. And, you know, we were really into sustainability, building things up. My wife is obsessed with like buying local products. She like is a big believer in autonomous food growth. So like that you only buy food from where you live because it's not sustainable to buy from anywhere else. And so she kind of like lives this lifestyle. We built this company to do that. And it really opened my eyes to like, most people don't really care that much about any of this, at least right now. There's definitely a subset of like young people, but if you said to the young people, hey, this t-shirt at H&M is $5 and ours is 30, they'd be like, am I really going to spend $30 on this? I don't have $30. So they're going to go buy the other H&M shirt. So it opened my eyes to certain things there as far as like sustainability and you know, having a purpose. And then also I met some entrepreneurs that had started other companies and then their second or third company was more of this like passion project. And what I've noticed is like, if you want to do, you know, the passion thing or things that change the world, you might get lucky and that you're one of the entrepreneurs that gets to raise a lot of money and builds these things. But from what I've seen, I worked at a clean tech VC for a while here in Spain. And what I saw was the people that had the most success were ones that had already been successful. And now they were able to basically say, I'm going to work on what I care about the most. And because I've had this success, I can work on my passion project, even if it might return less money than maybe that first or second company. Now I can work on this. Even if I tell the investor, like, this isn't going to be the same thing as the other one, they'll still know that something will come out of this because they can believe in me. And I think a lot of times people jump directly to like, I have to work on something that will change the world or be the greatest thing, when it might have been better for them to start, like I said, like an accounting, you know, an online accounting firm, to start, make 2 million and then go off and, you know, work on that sort of passion project, or even it could be an NGO or something else that they might want to do afterwards. And for me, my passion is just to control my time. Like that's my passion, is absolute control of what I do and my time. I don't want to be, you know, 45 or 50 years old where I have to make decisions that I don't get to make. I don't get to make that decision. The decision is based on like money or something else. That for me is my ultimate passion. It's just absolute control of my life and my time. So I find passion inside of that. And that also is like my kids, you know, doing projects and doing things that interest me on the side. But it was an eye-opening experience starting like a sustainable company for that reason. Because I did meet some entrepreneurs similar to me that kind of gave me that response of like, you got to wait a little bit. Like you need to have some success before you jump into the passion project.
I love that. I love that though. You have a clear sense like what you're passionate about. That's not external, but really internal. And that seems even more powerful because then you align to that, and then, you know, the business can be very different in how you go about it. But that sense of clear certainty, like why you're doing this is important to you, and it's driving those decisions appropriately. And we talk a lot about like finding your purpose. Do you have any advice to people about how to find your purpose, and should they even seek that on the entrepreneurial journey?
That's a hard question. I think it's important to find your purpose. I think it changes a lot. I think a lot of times people, they want to see their purpose for like their whole life. And I think you might have a purpose for 2 or 3 years and it's going to change. I personally, what I've learned is to be very flexible on whatever I believe and to be open to other people's opinions or ideas. That's something I've learned a lot over the last 10 years has been, don't fix yourself into one journey or one thought process. And that's a lot from like from working sort of in finance and investment. Like the best investors, they always say, are the people that they'll change their mind on a dime. Like somebody brings them a better piece of information or something that completely contradicts them. And the best investors are like, that's right. I'm going to, like, people will change billions of dollars of investment because just one person came to them, gave them a better argument. And they said, okay, I'm going to completely change my whole portfolio because of that. And I think oftentimes, especially now, you see people on social media that are so like fixated in their own world that you do need to be open to different paths and different passions and say, it's okay if your passion today is being obsessed with your own time and tomorrow it's, you know, sustainable vegetarian gardening. It's okay to change. Like you're allowed to change. You don't have to be the same person for 100 years.
Right. I love that. Because we get so stuck in this fixed mindset that as if like we grow up and that's it. Like that's it. You're an adult now. And now you have this job and you have this responsibility and nothing changes. Like stay to that until you hopefully retire and hopefully have enough money to retire. And then good luck. As opposed to like, you're constantly changing. Like even on our DNA cellular level, our body molecules are changing, right? Let's say like your cells every 7 years, right? We're new. Like you're literally a new physical body is appearing, but yet we have this sense like we have to be the same person. Like, so I love that. Be like I was in the research science space right before I met working in that science, like be a scientist, experiment, like have hypotheses of what's possible, test things out. And if something comes about that's a better idea, they're like, oh, now I realize it's like, that's beautiful. If you look back at your ideas, like that was wrong. Amazing. That's like a beautiful power as opposed to a weakness. Like, you know what? I've changed.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
And you don't have to be fixed. I will say the one thing that I go against in this, and I've made this mistake, is I do have friends and I do have colleagues that have been very successful in focusing on one market or one thing. They've changed like personally and changed the way they do it, but they've been able to compound from like being 27 and not staying in the same job, but like just staying in the same market or the same area and finding ways to find opportunities inside of there, whether it's, you know, I have friends that are focused on real estate and they're hyper focused on like this type of real estate in this place in this way. And they have so much knowledge and so many connections that it really does compound for them, where I would say a lot of times us as entrepreneurs, we have a tendency to go after like shiny objects, or the grass is always greener and you could miss opportunities. And I've been guilty. I've jumped around to a lot of different things. And sometimes I have regrets and sometimes no. It does make life more interesting. But I can see that the path is way easier for a lot of my friends that did just keep building on top of those things. But they also have changed as people and as, you know, in other ways. But I will say that there is something to be said for compounding inside of one market and, you know, letting the snowball roll down the hill for you.
Absolutely. And I want to wrap up and ask this question. So here we are starting 2024, and this episode is going to come around right around the same time. You mentioned previously like observing trends, right? Realizing this is happening. Sometimes like 20, hindsight is 2020. Are there any trends that you are excited about in 2024 that maybe entrepreneurs should be mindful of?
I mean, the obvious one is people talk about like AI. We are pretty conscious of that, especially in HR. I mean, I think there's going to be a lot of changes in like how our software works, how we do. Like my CTO and I were talking about it yesterday. Um, Trying to think any trends that I can think of. I mean, I do think that a lot of remedial tasks that were done before by people, or you might have hired a VA in the Philippines to do. I think a lot of those are going to become pretty, I wouldn't say they're going to become extinct, but I think that there's going to be a lot of alternatives that are very easy to use tools that are going to come out over the next year or so. I would say probably 3 years. I think the one key thing, and like I try and teach my kids of any trend over anything, is the ability to critically think and to be creative. Yes. I don't think that's ever going to go away. I think that'll be of value for decades to come. Yeah. And that's what I always kind of give people. Like if people ask me about trends, I'm like, just try and figure out anyone that can figure out ways to help people be critical thinkers and to be creative is going to be the most important tools that are out there in the future. I wish I had a better answer for like immediate future, but I honestly, I see a lot of things that come to me and I don't know where anything's really going right now. It feels like we have a lot of sand moving underneath us and I'm not really sure where it's going to shake out over the next year or so.
That's perfect. And for your company, Lanteria, what are like big aspirations for 2024? And like maybe so something our goal, what?
I mean, my immediate goal is to raise money. Like we're trying to raise $1 million. Our other goal is to grow our ARR 50%. And another area that I'm kind of exploring is we would like to probably acquire another company, whether for geographic reasons to go globally or even merge with another company. That's something that we're exploring too, is to, find another company in another region that we might be able to merge with and, inorganically grow our revenue, double our revenue or even triple it. So, I mean, that's kind of my major goals is keep my eye out for potential inorganic growth things, but especially right now, close this financing so I can, like I said, put the right people in the right seats because I'm currently in too many seats and need to be removed from them.
And so those are sales roles, right? So if you're in sales or know somebody who's a great salesman, that's what you're looking for. Is that right?
Sales, we're looking for salespeople and we're looking for money. That's really our two critical needs at this point.
Beautiful. So if you're listening to this, I will add some links for your LinkedIn. Let me know how people should find you, connect with you. Is it best to do LinkedIn or a better other way?
LinkedIn or Twitter. That's the only place. I'm not really on Instagram. I'm not on Facebook. I don't have TikTok. I do have TikTok. I don't use it, but I usually am on Twitter or LinkedIn. I don't really do much else besides those two things on the internet.
Cool. We'll add those. So reach out again if you have thoughtful, concise questions, or if you are looking to contribute to this amazing company 2024. Andrew, thank you so much for being so generous of your time. Are there any final thoughts that you have, the things you want to share with entrepreneurs who are starting this path, who are learning on this path, before we go into our rapid fire questions?
No, I would just tell them I would do it. I would go in with your eyes open and know, like I said, you know the odds are stacked against you, but you're going to do it anyways, knowing that the odds are stacked. It's like going to the casino. You know you're probably not going to win, but you're going to do it anyways. So take the leap.
Absolutely. And you're going to learn something from your experience that you were talking about. Every time you learned something, right? And then you got curious and you diversified. And so love that. Okay. Rapid fire questions. First one, whenever you're ready.
Ready.
Okay. Ready. Cool. One piece of advice you'd give to your younger self starting out in business.
To my younger self starting out in business. Meet as many people as you can early on in life before you have kids or a wife and try and build relationships with them.
That's so funny. Okay. I love that. to give anybody hope, I'm a mom working remotely doing this, and I've met so many incredible people around the world. So if you've passed that, if you passed that bridge, no, it's not a game over for you. Okay.
No, it's not game over. But you asked for an early, if I was younger.
Yes, that's very fair. Very fair. Okay. What's the most unexpected lesson you've learned from living in a different country?
The most unexpected lesson that the way we do things in America isn't necessarily the right way and the best way to do things, I would say. And my dad, I remember the first time he came here, he asked my wife, he was like, what do people think of Americans here? And my wife started to answer, and he's like, but they think we're rich, right? And we got a lot of money, right? And she was like, no, they think you guys are assholes. He was like, what?
You know, there are certain themes that come around globally about people's personas. So
yeah,
I can relate to that. Okay. Last but not least, in the positive sense, going off track is?
In the positives, going off track is the hardest. It's probably the hardest decision, but the most fulfilling if you want to experience sort of a different life.
Okay.
I would say. The most concise
I love
way.
it. No, that was great. Anna, thank you so much for your time. And to our audience, I hope you find some inspiration wherever you are on your entrepreneur journey. Maybe you learn something new about a different space. Maybe you have a different perspective about how you should be approaching entrepreneurship, your whole purpose, change and this topic. So wherever you are, I'm wishing you an incredible start to 2024. Keep exploring, keep changing, keep growing. And I hope you have the most fulfilling journey possible. And as always, let's take over the world together. Right off track. Thank you so much, Andrew. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Anya. I appreciate it.
Take care.